Okay, looks like we're live. Hello and welcome to Biotensegrity Party number 6, second season. So that's 2.6. Today we are discussing what is biotensegrity. We'll be looking at tensegrity, biotensegrity, applied biotensegrity, and more. And I guess I should say I am coming to you from Canada, Deep Cove on Coast Salish territory, near Vancouver, BC, and I'll pass it on to you, Susan.
And I'm Susan Lowell de Solorzano from Washington, D.C.
And my name is Graham Scarr from Nottingham, UK.
I am Leonid Bloom from Limassol at Cyprus,
And I guess I'm Doug Johnson. I live in Boston.
All right. And it's our intention to promote and share the biotensegrity concept with as many people as possible and to include you all in that mission. The Biotensegrity Party is an all-volunteer production of the Stephen M. Levin Biotensegrity Archive, a not-for-profit organization in the United States, whose mission is to educate, raise public awareness, and build community in the field of biotensegrity, and to foster and forward discovery, research, and understanding in the fields of science, health, and medicine, particularly as they relate to biotensegrity. And today you have 5 of us here from the board of the Biotensegrity Archive.
And this is for the panel discussion, but before we move on to that, I am happy to introduce you to the Biotensegrity Party team. We're an all-volunteer team, and in addition to Graham, Susan, and I, who are co-hosts, we have Mariana Barreto from Mississauga, Ontario. Hi, Mariana.
Hi, hello.
And Rachel Tudor from Tumwater, Washington. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Chris.
And we have Lisa Babiak from St. Albert, Alberta. That's also in Canada. Hi, Lisa. And Gregory Chudy from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Hi, Gregory. We have first time today joining our team, Patricia Hopper, who's from Seattle, Washington. Hi, Patricia. And we all want to extend to everybody here on Zoom, everybody on YouTube, a warm welcome. We're so happy to have you here. We're going to begin things with an opening toast. Graham, are you ready for that?
Chris. Yes, I'm going to do a short toast. Here's to better biotensegrity definitions for better understanding of biotensegrity. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Okay, before we go on to the panel discussion, Graham, do you have a word for us from our sponsors?
Our sponsors, oh yes. Our Biotensegrity Party is an all-volunteer production of the Stephen M. Levin Biotensegrity Archive and made possible through the generous support of our sponsors. Starting with Handspring Publishing in East Lothian, Scotland, we have a wide range of authors and books available for movement and manual therapy professionals, and are offering a generous discount coupon to those on the Biotensegrity Archive mailing list. Handspring also produce a regular newsletter, which is free, and you can join from their website and provides details of their ongoing webinar series with Elizabeth Larkham. Next, we have Embodied Biotensegrity with Chris Clancy in Vancouver, British Columbia, who provide an excellent resource for those of you looking to learn more about biotensegrity. Chris is offering a 14-day free trial for her ongoing course, Biotensegrity Trailblazers, so check out the chat box for more information. Artifact Pro in Madrid, Spain, where you can find wonderfully constructed tensegrity models and who also offer a generous discount coupon to our Zoom participants. Biotensegrity Congress, coming from Brazil, will be running a series of workshops in both English and Portuguese for movement teachers and manual therapists from April the 23rd to the 25th. And just in a few hours ago from the fasciahub.com, who are organizing a full-day event entitled The Fascial Foot on Saturday, 8th of May, with 4 leading speakers from the world of fascia: John Sharkey, Wilbur Kelsick, Elizabeth Larkham, and Philip Beach, who will be showing their latest research and insights, plus a somatic experiencing session with innovative movement teacher Rachel Tudor, who will take you into an engaging with your own feet and lead to a deeper awareness that informs both your practice and your self-care. Early bird tickets are £35, are currently available until the 5th of May. So check out the chat box. And for all of those you on the YouTube channel, by joining the free Biotensegrity Archive newsletter, you can get more details of these discount codes. So back to you, Chris.
Actually, I think we're going to pass it on to Leonid now, because he's going to
Okay.
introduce our topic for today. And then we'll go
Okay.
through by sharing some definitions from books and papers and such.
Great.
All right. So I guess
And
today
this-
we
Hold
have the
on,
follow.
Leonid.
Yeah.
Leonid, sorry. This is when we ask people to turn their cameras off and make sure they're muted, because it all works better for the YouTube folks if we do that. Thank you.
And while they're doing that, we might want to mention to the folks on YouTube that we have someone from our team monitoring the YouTube channel. So if you're there and you have questions, you have comments, I can't remember who it is. Sorry, Mariana, I think it is. We'll be we'll be copying and pasting and transferring your questions, your comments over to the Zoom chat so that we can hopefully have time to respond to them. Okay, we ready to pass it on to Leonid now?
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Sue. So thank you. Okay, so I just wanted to get a little bit of a narrative for today, since I guess I'm one of the bigger enthusiasts of the definitions and the explorations of those. So we had no secrets, we had our good preparation yesterday, so like kind of giving a preliminary discussion. So the plan is going to be like this. So we're going to read few definitions which already been in their sort of written universe, and particularly since 2 persons, Danielle Claude Martin and Steve Levin, are not joining us today. So in that sense, we'll have to just voice them over. And then after that, we'll get into several moves. So the next section will be their short videos. Then we will get into the next phase, which is about the journey to biotensegrity, because there are 2 kind of basic ways, right? So either you depart from something that you really dislike in the standard scientific approach, or you being kind of drawn and attracted by the shining light of biotensegrity, right? And in that sense, that's what we are going to sort of share from all 5 of us as the Biotensegrity archive members. And then we move on to the next sort of lightning round of the preferred definitions. And we also want to have the time to get into their like final sort of transition for today, which would be trying to explore their sort of pragmatic consequences of the biotensegrity definitions. So that would be everything which Chris just named, the applied biotensegrity, the practical aspect of it, the way how it comes into different fields and sort of different fields of science, experience, and everything else. So that's kind of their overall narrative. So since Susan is the most recent published author, I obviously invite everybody to get her wonderful book, Everything Moves. So I guess she will be the first one having the privilege of getting her definition out into the world first.
Wow. Okay. Well, I pulled up several. I'll read one statement. Thank you, thank you, Leonid. Okay. Biotensegrity provides the only superstability hypothesis for biology, which includes and accommodates concepts and properties such as the inherent error canceling potential of closed kinematic chains, kinematic indeterminacy, many-to-one mapping, the transmutability of soft matter, and the small world networks, redundancy, degeneracy, and anti-fragility of complex adaptive systems.
Well, that's 10 definitions in one. So this is, so,
Boom.
just on the discussion of your definition alone, we can probably spend like 3 hours, right? So, okay. So, Graham, so as the leader in the writings about biointegrity, could you please share yours?
Yes, thanks, Leonid. So, biotensegrity is a structural principle in biology that describes a relationship between every part of an organism and the mechanical system that integrates them into a complete functional unit. Biotensegrity is also a concept, a field of inquiry that examines living forms through first principles, and it is not limited by a simple definition. So that's my chosen place to start.
Okay. Doug, maybe you will get the next step.
So being an unpublished author, I'm going to actually read something of Maren Deal's. And to take a slightly different tack too, this is really, it's actually not so much a definition, but this is talking about application and experience. So this is again from Maren Deal. As soon as the horse has learned that it can and should always fill his space, that filling space has nothing to do with going faster, and slowing down has nothing to do with yielding. You're out of the woods. Then horse and human form a common tensegrity entity acting as a whole, usually. Because, of course, this unity gets lost again and again, but it is regained faster and faster for the simple reason that both see it as desirable.
So, Chris, your time.
My time. And Doug, can you turn your volume up on your mic just a tad, please? So this is a definition from the paper Biotensegrity, the Mechanics of Fascia, which is a 2012 paper that was co-written by Stephen Levin and Danielle Claude Martin. So I'm going to bring their voices, their writing into the conversation. Biotensegrity incorporates the physical laws related to triangulated and therefore inherently stable structural forms, closest packing and foams, and the tensegrity structures as conceived by Kenneth Snelson and Buckminster Fuller into a biological model that would appropriately model organisms from viruses to vertebrates, their systems and their subsystems. This is biotensegrity. Biotensegrity reverses the centuries-old concept that the skeleton is the frame upon which the soft tissue is draped, and replaces it with an integrated fascial fabric with floating compression elements, bones and invertebrates, and meshed within the interstices of the tensioned elements. Again, this is from Biotensegrity, the Mechanics of Fascia.
All right, so then I will read another set of definitions from Danielle Claude Martin, and then, for those of you who don't know, so then Danielle Claude Martin is their physicist, so French, German educated physicist, and she's probably one of the early people who managed to the first glue of their biotensegrity community. She's the person who organized the original biotensegrity interest group meetings and so on. And unfortunately, now she has to care for her elderly parents. That's why she doesn't participate that much in those. But of course, her book on biotensegrity, which has been published by Keener Publishers, is probably a bit more difficult to find than the one from Graham, but I would strongly recommend to everyone to get it. So here are several definitions.
Leonie, can I add? Daniel Claude is also an internal martial arts teacher.
That's true. And
yeah. I think that's important.
And the person who speaks, 7 languages, including the Russian one, and Korean, and so on. So she is really a polymath and amazing person in herself. So I will share some of the definitions from her book, and let's go. So she starts: the term tensegrity can be misleading in that it emphasizes the tensional aspect only and apparently seems to ignore the compression. However, the true tensegrity maximizes the advantages of tension and minimizes the drawbacks of compression. So there is a duality of push and pull that gives the rise to everything that is stable, especially to tensegrity structures. To define a tensegrity structure means taking three factors into account: tension, compression, and the way that they are connected into the particular tensegral configuration. And tensegrity provides a concrete, in other words, non-abstract tool for training complex thinking, and which invites one to ponder the real value of trying to make simplicity the foundation of complexity. And the more pragmatic version of hers is the following. Body support is the tensor compressional, since it is due to the tensegral interaction. It is the whole biotensegral configuration that supports the body weight. And in that respect, we have to remember that the atlas doesn't carry the head, and the foot bones do not carry the whole weight, the whole body weight above them. So that's the whole spectrum of definitions that we have sort of dropped your way. And as I said, if we start exploring them, they could be all sorts of their like leads and so on. But I just wanted to mention before we move further that this variety of the definitions, in fact, has to be taken as strength of this concept rather than the weakness. Because the things which are based on the one-on-one simple collision interactions and could be described by a super compact equation, so that's actually, you know, the simplicity without the built-in complexity. So when we talk about the complexity, we're actually dealing with multifaceted reality, and I think that that's exactly what leads, what actually helps and what makes the biotensegrity approach in itself and the concept is so powerful in helping to shape the experiences for a very broad spectrum of practitioners, from hands-on to psychologists to architectures to architects to engineers, and the list can go on. And Doug is nodding because he's as the person who sees tensegrity in music and in the musical teaching. So let's move on. Susan, maybe you will introduce the next step, or Chris, you would do?
I'll go ahead, and that is to say that next we have a video that Maren prepared. I think Maren's here today. I know she was planning on coming. Mariana's going to cue that up and share it for everyone. Some of you who were here last week will recognize it. It's just such an amazing little clip that we felt we had to share it today. So while we wait for Mariana to set that up, Susan, do you have anything to say? Do you want me to read another definition?
Well, yeah. If you've got another one, do you have
another one here? This is from Steve. This is from the closed kinematic chain paper, I believe. Biotensegrity considers that a living organism is really a complex balance of force vectors, and that it is the efficient separation of the forces of tension and compression into different structural modules or bars that enable them all to change shape with the minimum of effort and automatically return to the same position of stable equilibrium. This is from the Closed Kinematic Chains paper of 2017, co-written by Stephen Levin, Susan Lowell, De Soloranzo, Graham Scarr. Okay, great.
And I apologize for being distracted. My grandchildren don't know a thing about the Tea Party. They're 4 and 6, and they're trying to call me, so I got thrown off there.
Go ahead, Mariana.
Music is enthusiastic. In that sense, of course, I have to bring it back as a completion there to the story. How does that all links to biotensegrity? So, and in that respect, this is very straightforward, because once again, what are we talking about? tensegrity, and so on. It's not about the struts and cables. Struts and cables are just the illustration how you can do out of the hard matter. Tensegrity is about behavior. It's about the ability to have this, how far you from that equilibrium of death, how far are you from the free body diagram, and what you gain out of this, how these tension things could be stacked. That's what about the tensegrity, how you convert behavior wise, how you convert irregular impacts that are coming from all sorts, how you convert them into the maximum uniformity of the deformation, distributing it through the tension and not via the length. Do you see how it plays together?
Thanks, Mariana and Leonid. Thank you. Okay, next we have a lightning round. Can I just share with everyone, as I would consider myself the junior board member on the Biotensegrity Archive, who is sometimes somewhat intimidated by the whole situation. Yesterday, as we were preparing, we had a lightning round in which we started to bring forward our own definitions of biotensegrity. I really encourage you to try this yourself with some of your colleagues. It puts you on the spot and it gives you the pressure you need to actually sit down and write something. So why don't I start? And then with my nicely prepared definition, as opposed to the one that's off the top of my head. And then I'll just toss the ball as we were doing yesterday. Okay, you guys, we're good with that?
So are we giving written definitions or are we giving off the top of our head?
Well, you can give off the top of your head. I'm just proud of I wrote a definition because that's what puts me in my comfort zone. As everybody here knows, we get stumped by this question, what is biotensegrity? And I found myself that way yesterday. So I sat down and I did my homework, and I'm going to read what I wrote, which is biotensegrity is an emerging science that helps us understand the form and function of biological organisms as structural tensegrities. Inherent in this is the synergetic and synergistic relationship of the invisible forces of continuous tension and discontinuous compression, which, number one, drive movement, self-assembly, self-adaptation on all scales. Two, distributes forces globally, in Susan's words, instantly and everywhere. And three, operates as efficiently as possible in any given moment and is constantly changing as we are living, breathing, moving beings. Okay, I'm going to toss it to you, Susan.
All right, instantly and everywhere comes from Steve. I don't want to take credit from that.
Okay, well, I learned it from
That's
you.
okay. Yeah, that's good. Biotensegrity is a way of looking at all biological life and its structure and function through all time and at all scale levels and its systems and subsystems. And therefore, you cannot begin your study of biotensegrity until first you build your own tensegrity structure.
Toss the ball to someone else, Susan.
Oh, I'll pass it to Graham.
Oh, thank you. Yes, short one here. Biotensegrity describes the anatomy of stability and change. That's it.
That's
Good.
succinct.
Pass it.
Go ahead, Leonid.
Ball is the hardest thing to remember, right?
Got it. So this is essentially taken from and inspired by Steve, but tensegrity explains, I believe, quite profoundly how we never move a part of our body. For instance, we don't bend our elbow. We are always reconfiguring our whole structure. And Leonid.
Thank you. Well, I mean, out of the bunch of the ones that I came up lately, so one of the things that I really wanted to highlight is this, is that if we look at the original works of Fuller, so the term synergy is very often being used in passing, right? So synergy, management everywhere. But the original thing is that if we look back at the works of Fuller, synergy and tensegrity were two sides of the same coin, right? So what is synergy? Synergy is their ability, of the elements to give rise to the whole, which is greater than the sum of the parts, right? So it's this kind of additional multiplicator of the interactions which give their system its properties. And for original Fuller's situation, right? So you see the way that Fuller originally introduced it. So tensegrity was actually operationalizing, right? It's the way to operationalize and make it practical, the whole concept of synergy, from just, the abstract, the abstract concept, to actually see it in the practical essence. So I would stick to this one for now, and I can pass it back to Sue. You want to get another one out from your sleeve?
I'll do a short one. Okay. I believe biotensegrity is one of the most exciting concepts emerging in our world today, and that it reveals, in the words of Gregory Bateson, the pattern which connects. And I'll pass it to Doug again.
So a similar definition or similar approach as last time. One of the basic paradoxes of biomechanics is if we don't stand up exactly straight, we'll be under constant stress. If we lean over, we'll be under all sorts of shear and strain. But obviously, we can curl and do all sorts of things. And for that basic thing, biotensegrity explains it better than anything I know.
Pass it.
Chris.
Thanks, Doug. Biotensegrity is a paradigm shift from the application of mechanical engineering and hard matter physics principles to the body, to that of tensegrity structural principles, not just to the body, but all biological organisms, from, as Steve says, viruses to vertebrates and all between systems and subsystems. The big kind of shaking up, the things that lots of people miss, is that with this comes a difference in the relationship between what happens when external forces hit the body, just as when they hit this tensegrity, instead of being managed with, as you learned in, well, I didn't learn biomechanics, but as some people learned in biomechanics, the forces are immediately redistributed so that we can better manage them. And it is a moment to moment to moment happening. Since tensegrities are self-stressed and self-stabilizing, super stable in terms of biotensegrity, they don't rely on being still. They don't rely on a specific orientation to gravity in order to be integrated and to maintain their overall shape. So that means for us, we don't have to put that same emphasis on bracing our spine in order to protect ourselves when we move. I'm a yoga teacher by training, retired now, but this means a shift from contracting your abs, engaging your core in order to feel safe and stable, to really allowing ourselves to move in ease. It brings grace and a sense of freedom, and that's really exciting. I pass it to Graham.
Thank you, Chris. Biotensegrity is a conceptual framework from which to understand biology, which is based on some fundamental principles of self-organization and from which everything else is derived. And I'll just add a little extra bit to my last definition, which was biotensegrity is about the anatomy of stability and change. And I mean that in anatomy in both senses, which is a structure of living organism, but also the study of the stability, structure, and dynamics of something. So anatomy and stability and change have multiple meanings which derive out of that definition. I'll pass it to Leonid.
Thank you, Graham. So the one that I will try to give now is actually this. So you see, biotensegrity in essentially is anti-mechanics. So that's really something that deserves thinking, right? Is that if we look at it from this perspective, so the essence of the mechanics is the free body diagram, which shows us their true static situation when the equilibrium means that the forces which are zeroed out in this kind of timeless structure. So that's death. So what do we get today? We have thermodynamics, right? So it's the thermodynamics of death, but then we also have the thermodynamics, which is described as being far from equilibrium, right? So everything which has to do with life is metastable and as far from equilibrium as possible. So in that sense, you can say that the thermodynamics of death, and there is the anti-thermodynamics, which be the thermodynamics of living. So the same, by the same kind of principle, if we have the mechanics of death, so then we should have the anti-mechanics, right? So you see the mechanics which of life would be the anti-mechanics of death. So effectively that would be the situation as which is as far from equilibrium as possible and yet being stable. So in that sense, biotensegrity is actually the, let's say, structural representation of the far from equilibrium biomechanics. In other words, the mechanics of life.
Can I follow that?
With pleasure.
All right. There is no scientific evidence that supports modeling the body as a calculable, compression-based linear static matter building or machine, and yet these assumptions persist. Everything we think we know that is based on assumptions of a continuous compression, machine modeling, linearly calculable paradigm needs to be re-evaluated in the light of evidence that a new and different model only available for the last 100 years, tensegrity, may be a better fit. Biotensegrity invites us to consider this other model.
And I'm going to just jump on here and say that for those of us like me who jumped in the middle, suddenly we realize we don't know. It can be really confusing when we start to embark upon a learning journey into the concept of biotensegrity because of exactly what Susan's saying. There are concepts that we bring to biotensegrity that we didn't learn in grade school. Most of us didn't learn in our professional trainings. Things like tensegrity, soft matter, the way that geometry is expressed, and I'm learning now somewhat different by Buckminster Fuller. What else? Heterarchy, word I love. Every part.
System science.
Keep going, keep throwing things. We didn't learn that, so it can be challenging. And yet, the people that come to this community tend to be like all of us here with our cameras on, all of us here with the cameras off, who are avid learners, happy to get into discussion. We realize that we're not going to agree on everything, and that's part of what makes this exciting. I also want to add that knowing we don't know is such an important part of learning. I'll talk about that later when you ask about how I got into biotensegrity. Anybody else on the panel before we move on?
Well, I mean, maybe
shall I?
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. But I also
go
want
ahead.
to make sure,
Go ahead, Susan.
No. It's a point of order thing. I want to make sure that after we show the next video, I think Doug's got something he's going to show us on the piano, and I just wanted to. I didn't know if Leonid had caught that. Go ahead, Leonid.
Oh, no, I just wanted to share one specifically for Japan Deval, right? So you see, because that's really, I think, is the beautiful one, right? So you see, if we look back at the origins of the tensegrity and bring it back, right? So you see, what we can see there is that effectively Fuller came up with a very simple observation that there are just two kind of limiting types of the relationships structures, right? So when you look at the one limiting factor is the sphere being, and this principle of sphericity, so being the greatest volume that could be included into the given surface. So that's the structure with the least surface, which means that that's the structure which loses least energy. And the other limiting form in his terms would be the tetrahedral thing. So that will be there for, that will be the well, tetrahedral. Okay, so I guess you all know what I mean, right? So which is another polar opposite of it, right? So you see that tetrahedricity, if I can say that, right?
Yeah.
So you see, actually means that you get the minimal volume within the given surface, right? Sphere, that's maximum volume within the given surface. Tetrahedron is their minimal volume within the given surface. So what would be the energy optimization in that sense? So that it's in the tetrahedral form, it costs the least to run the surfaces of the interaction, right? So you see, that's would be the flip of the energy minimization. And if we put these two basic principles, which are just two limiting relationships between the surface and volume, so that beautifully comes into the famous quotes from Jaap van der Waal. How large is the egg cell, right? So she is as large as the cell could possibly be. So that's the principle of the sphericity, but at the same time, the sphericity is the inert principle, right? And how small is the sperm cell? That's the smallest, as small as the cell could be. So it's just the nucleus with their almost devoid of cytoplasm, but at the same time with the maximum surface of the interaction. And when the two of them meet, that's where you get the zygote, and that's where you got the potential for the wonders of life, right? So in that sense, I want to bring this as the core kind of principles of this relationship, so that also to help you to move you away from the struts and cables, right? So that we don't get stuck into this simple mechanics and try to kind of draw the wires and so on. So effectively, it all comes back to this organizing principles, because at the end of the day, the main message behind everything is there. Space has shape, and that things that emerge and self-stabilize in space, they follow certain constraints, and between those two polar opposites, you've got the emergence, all the spectrum in between. That's what we effectively, what manifests as nature, as life. Yeah, I was quite
Great.
compact,
Yeah.
hopefully. So, Susan, shall we move to your mini video to
Yeah,
give some
sure.
illustrations?
Yeah.
And then we'll move on into the experiential part.
And
Yeah.
as Mariana's, oh, she's ready. Okay, go ahead, Mariana.
Biotensegrity and applied biotensegrity. Tensegrity structures are pretty new and they're really unique. Phil Earnhardt says
We
this is
increase the
only the
volume.
second way that humans have ever figured out how to build. And this is after hundreds of thousands of years of human culture. These structures have a oneness that somehow emerges from this duality of struts that resist being pushed and cables that resist being pulled. And what you really have to do is build a tensegrity if you really want to understand these. Once you build one, you can feel it, you can experience it, and you can let its unexpected behaviors surprise you. The Wyss Institute at Harvard University says that tensegrity is a fundamental determinant of all living systems at all size scales, and they call it the architecture of life. So, a lot of people are looking at this. It's important to distinguish between tensegrity as a structure and tensegrity the word, because people get really confused. And it's easy to see why. The structure has, any tensegrity structure has two components, the struts that are under compression and the cables that are under tension. But tensegrity, the word, also has two components. Those two components are tension and integrity, two different words. And Buckminster Fuller combined them in something called a portmanteau, which is an invention. And so he made up the word. But a tensegrity is not made out of tension and integrity because those are not building materials. Tensegrities are systems, and the movement that they exhibit is omnidirectional, it's helical, it's unexpected, it's auxetic, and everything moves instantly everywhere. So that's tensegrity. What's biotensegrity? And biotensegrity is the theory of tensegrity architecture in biology. We're talking about all living organisms from viruses to vertebrates, their systems and subsystems. Tensegrity and biotensegrity, these are pure sciences, natural sciences. We're just having the goal of trying to understand what it is we're trying to learn about. We're not trying to do anything other than understand it. So if that's tensegrity and that's biotensegrity, then what is it that's sort of the elephant in the room, as they say? Most of the people who are the early adopters of biotensegrity, they may be biotensegrity aware, biotensegrity inspired, but they do have a goal. They're trying to invent something or they're trying to innovate. They're trying to develop practical applications. So they are trying to solve problems by understanding biotensegrity. And what we've done is we've started to call this applied biotensegrity. So anybody who's studying biotensegrity with the purpose of trying to improve clinical or practical applications, improve movement practices, therapeutic techniques, anybody who's using it for any kind of problem solving or invention, engineering, this all falls under the category of this biotensegrity inspired applied biotensegrity. But then we also have the category of that which is just biotensegrity inspired. It's not trying to solve any kind of problem, it's just exploring. And for the sake of exploration, this would be the sort of artistic ventures that we're seeing. And we've seen everything from volumetric poetry to dance performances, of course, sculptures. So these are our categories. And so we're trying to figure out and talk about the work we're trying to do. These are the four categories we're using. Of course, you can't apply biotensegrity if you don't study biotensegrity as it is as a pure science. And you can't really study biotensegrity without an understanding of tensegrity. And these things tend to sort of flow back and forth. We who study this tend to kind of flow between these different categories of study in order to round out our work and improve what we're doing. So that's what we've got to share today. And I want to thank you so much. Please come and visit us on YouTube or at the Biotensegrity Archive website. I'm Susan at biotensegrityarchive.org. And please
That's
join
good.
us
You
on
can
Fridays
cut
for
it
our
there. Yeah. So you're already at the tea party.
Okay. So I think that was a good one. Really, like you put it into these categories and so on, and highlighted the fact that we are trying to span a vast expanse, right? And in that sense, this is one of the questions that actually we have to ask ourselves, right? So you see, the analogy that I would try to use is that if we are starting from the biomechanics per se, so where are we? Are we aspiring to do one single long jump, like kind of Bob Beamon style, like just make a giant single leap? Or are we going to be in the triple jump category, right? So where every single jump is smaller, but hopefully we'll get further. So, and in that sense, if we talk about the specifics of what and how to understand tensegrity, well, in fact, how we get back to the like revisiting Fuller and his, well, let's say geometry, right? So you see then tensegrity itself, then the applications of the tensegrity to the bio as biotensegrity. Then we have the level of biotensegrity at the micro scale and the biotensegrity at the macro scale, which seem to be another difficult thing to get, right? So then we get from there to their biotensegrity informed and inspired things such as the practical applications and the development into the wide spectrum of the adjacent kind of practices. So in that sense, it sounds as a certain mix between the pole vault, triple jump, and long jump, and maybe even unmanned flight at the same time, right? So that's, I just really want us to recognize that we are not having a simple task to handle. And that's why one of the things that I really wanted to say before we move on is that what I believe is that we can think of approaching biotensegrity as something that I would sort of call the pragmatic, experiential codification approach, right? So pragmatic means that we don't want just theorize, we want to be connected to the outcomes and to the people who are dealing with real live matter, so with real practice, right? So on the other hand, experiential, that means that we're taking the broad and complex experiences that are people having ahead of the narrow experimental approaches. And in that sense, that makes a difficulty with sort of what is science and what is not. And that's why I bring the third point here, which would be codification, right? Because science typically demands the experimental and the quantitative approach as being the main sort of criteria for being to have this sort of glorious label of being called science. But when we are dealing with something pragmatic, when we are dealing with something experiential, we can't really expect that quantification is going to be helpful. It's too narrow. So that's why I'm looking here at the broader thing, how we can help the broad spectrum of practitioners to codify their experience so that what they get and what they, the whole like bulk of the data and the experiences and the interactions that they have in their life, so that would be better codified, so that they could actually build longer chains of reasoning and extract new knowledge out of their experiences. So that would be sort of my perspective. And from that perspective, what I wanted to say is that because of that, like we take the example of 5 of us as the biotensegrity enthusiasts, and by no means being the biotensegrity experts, right? So the biotensegrity enthusiasts. So, and what we wanted to do today is get a little bit of sharing, because there are 2 ways of defining it, right? So one is when we are departing from some dissatisfaction with the old. That's one way, right? And the other way is kind of being drawn and attracted by the shining light, right? So that's another way of moving in the new direction. So in other words, whether you see something which is inspiring you, or the other thing is it's something that disgusts you so much that you want to, that you want to basically do anything else but not that, right? So, and in that sense, I wanted to give our, we all 5 of us are coming from rather different backgrounds and different sort of archetypes of the personalities. So I think that it would be useful and kind of instructional for all the participants, so that if we would just kind of share the brief personal story, what brought us towards this state, right? So, and shall I start with Doug? Do you want, so Doug is the least conventional there, with the musical thing. So, and the virtual and the broadest thing. So let's start with Doug. So Doug, I pass it to you.
Except in my world, I'm the most conventional. It just depends on the world you're in. So the context I'd like to put this in just briefly is what is Leonid's talk, which I'm sure most everybody heard last week. The two things in particular were the idea of magic and the idea of phase shift. That the idea that at some points, and not so easy to measure or quantify, but at some points, because of some change in thoughts or some change in activity of a therapist or some change in structure over time, something shifts. And and the thing about this phase shift is, by its very nature, it's not a gradual thing. There's a different state. And in a similar way, related way, he's described this as magic. The part that's not science is magic, and the magic is the thing that a lot of us have experienced in different ways that I think that brought us here. And for me, there are a couple things, and I'll try to just be brief about this, but the experience at one point, studying Alexander technique, that there was a point where patiently things happen, but it wasn't a gradual shift as much as there was a point where I felt weightless. And I think that's a very common response. I felt weightless, light, and expansive versus heavy. And things seem effortless as opposed to effortful. And in that related state, power is available with no effort. And we all know what it feels like to effort and really not get much power. And so that state that our whole structure can come into is something that is a bit like a drug if you really enjoy it. And it certainly is if you're a musician, and it makes an enormous difference. There's so many examples. A trumpet player that can hit a high note or not. It's not always a matter of degree working up to it. And for me, I had the double experience of having pain at the instruments related to playing. And I finally met somebody who helped me into this phase change. And very quickly, the pain was gone. That was certainly magic in my life after trying lots of traditional things that didn't really help at all. And the thing I also found is the same phase change that ended up relieving the pain, if that's even the way to say it, that allowed the pain to just simply not be there, was also the thing that allowed for enormous differences in making music. So having power, having a large dynamic range, having power and supports for the softest sounds and fluency, all were coming from that same place of, once again, weightlessness, because everything is equalized down at the ground, and then the entire structure is expanding. And I just want to, this one sentence of Marin's just says it quickly, or says it efficiently, and I'm just going to play a few notes and hopefully demonstrate. As soon as a horse has learned that it can and should always fill his space, that filling space has nothing to do with going faster, and slowing down has nothing to do with yielding, you're out of the woods. It's so much the same thing, that the filling space isn't only about power, but it's also about lightness and gentle and floating. Filling space isn't necessarily about going up or going down. Going up isn't about lifting, going down isn't about dropping. It's all equally supported. And when that gets transferred to the instrument, if the arms are buoyant entirely and supported all the way down to the ground, in one hand, you should be able to have notes that are soft. hopefully that showed the concept. And whoever wants to go next.
Graham, you want to get your now the switch, because you are also a multi-layered person, so who definitely had different stages and phases in your life. Could you please share your journey there?
Yes, thank you, Leonid. Well, I started off as a biologist in a research lab, so I had standard scientific training, but later switched to osteopathy because I had a bad back and I was impressed in the way that I was treated. And of course, I learnt the same standard science stuff, the biomechanics about levers. I used to tell my patients that the spine is like a pile of bricks stacked on top of one another, and that we move through our lever system because that's what I'd been taught, and quite frankly, there was nothing else at the time. Until one day I read an article in an osteopathic magazine that described a different way of understanding the human body, which was interesting. And the thing that attracted my attention was a picture on the front of a tensegrity structure, which was really intriguing because I've always been interested in models, shapes, geometry. And once I read the article by an English osteopath, Anne Davison, no, that's not a Davidson.
It was Liz Davis.
Liz Davison, that's right. Thanks, really.
Liz Davis, not Davison. You know, let's say you're
right.
getting Joanne Avison and Liz Davis. You know, you kind of mix them into one person, right?
That's right. Yes, they're separate people. Yeah. Well, from reading that, I explored the internet, read articles that I'd already got on tensegrity but hadn't bothered to read before, discovered Steve Levin, and then just sunk myself into it because it was just explained all the doubts that I had before, but there was no other explanation, and there was nothing else to do except treat my patients in the same way I always did. I made refinements, but this just transformed the way I look at the body, and I wanted to go more into the science of it, the biology, so it doesn't just apply to the human body or treatment, it applies to everything in biology. And that's after 17 odd years, I feel I'm only just starting to scratch the surface, and it's really exciting. So that's my journey into biotensegrity.
Okay, Chris, shall you?
Thanks. Yeah, I was a yoga teacher and I was teaching Ashtanga yoga, which we learned also the conventional anatomy stack of bricks. And at one point, fairly early on, I shifted my practice to the Vijnana yoga practice, which is really a somatic practice of practicing understanding from inside the way we feel. And the principles of Vijnana yoga are very much the application of biotensegrity, but the originator didn't really bring that in. My teacher here, however, introduced us to Tom Myers, Anatomy Trains, to biotensegrity. We even watched Steve's video, actually. Remember borrowing it from her and bringing it home and making notes. But it wasn't until I started teaching for Vijnana Yoga International and my kids grew up, I chose to stay home and raise them, that I started to reach out a bit. And in 2015, I found my way in to Washington, D.C., to the Biotensegrity Summit, partly after reading Joanne Avison's book, which I should have here to hold up, but I don't. It's on my shelf right now, because she was she introduced biotensegrity and she knew yoga. She was integrating yoga. And in 2015, I met this community. I actually have a picture, Graham, of you and me, Jan Trewartha, and Carol Davis sitting around your table building tensegrities. I just found that the other day. And Susan took me under her wing. At that point, spending quite hours. Susan would spend a couple hours a week with me for many months. And that helped me realize that I really only understood the tip of the iceberg. I was like many people who hear about biotensegrity, we get excited, it makes so much sense, and we feel it in our body. And I had no idea really what I didn't understand. I can remember taking, writing down these words that Steve was saying at the summit, having to go home and look them up. And then thank you, Susan, for bringing me along, for mentoring me. At some point shortly after that, in 2016, I taught my first 40-hour embodied biotensegrity training, which introduced yoga teachers from outside of the Vijnana community to both biotensegrity and the yoga that I was practicing. And that was when I realized that this was groundbreaking, because people were so enthusiastic, it was blowing their mind, both biotensegrity itself, the way I was practicing, and the way that I teach. One of the words that I learned from this community is the word hierarchy, and it describes the way I teach. I say I would create a hierarchical learning space. And like in the body, where every part influences all the others in all directions, in a learning environment, and in my opinion, in the optimal learning environments, when we toss the ball back and forth, when we allow every voice to be heard, not just the ones that are writing the books. And yes, we're always so grateful to hear from all of you, but also people who are new. And those stupid questions that we're all afraid to ask, they're so important, and so important, not just for the people who are afraid to ask that have that same question, but for all of us. And in the membership program that I run, Graham and Susan are very often there. And I and all of the members are blown away at the generosity and humbleness of the people in this community. To have someone like, okay, it was so interesting. The first time Steve showed up, Graham showed up, people were starstruck and they were having a hard time talking. You know who you are. And yet we hear people like Graham thank you and acknowledge that they're learning from other people in the community. So I guess I'm kind of getting like I get, and that's very passionate. So I'm going to zip my lips now and I'm going to pass it on to Susan.
Thanks, Chris. And you have gone way beyond where you were in 2015, I have to say. And it's great to see you out in your own territory and forging new ground for all of us. I still can't crochet a hyperbolic curve, but I'm working on it. So I came to Biotensegrity. I think I'm more of the shining light story, because many years of practicing and teaching Tai Chi Chuan, there were certain lines in the ancient texts that we study, the Tai Chi classics, that seemed so mystical or confusing or enigmatic. There was a non-linearity. For example, there's a line that sometimes gets translated, only after studying for a long period of time in the right way can you suddenly get it. And there's another one that to me is a non-linearity thing, when about partner practice or working with another person. If he moves, if he does not move, I do not move. If he moves, I move first. So where do you put that? Also from the Tai Chi Classics, the title of my book, right? When one thing moves, everything moves. When one thing stops, everything stops. And also that there's a oneness to the body. All the pieces are threaded together. That there is yin and yang, which is what I consider that push and pull, right? And that every piece is either yin or yang, and all pieces are always both yin and yang must be clearly distinguished from each other. And so all these things were sort of like, what are they talking about? And then I held one of these in my hand when I made one, and I just physically was in a state of shock that this was a structural possibility that I had never been aware of, considered, And I thought, why doesn't anybody talk about this? This is amazing. What is going on? And so down the rabbit hole I went. So, Leonid, I think you're next.
Well, thank you, Susan. Well, I guess my story is a bit different. So it's in that sense, it's clearly the story of departure because, like I originally been trained in the cybernetics, so which is modeling of systems, and I always look at things through systems lens. And since my entire family is in the, medical um, field, and I started with doing their sort of but the cybernetics, they are generalists, right? So you have to apply it somewhere, and I've chose the application in the movement science, and I started by actually doing the video analysis of their children with cerebral palsy for my father, and I was looking some befores and afters, and I was kind of going through the endless clicks and so on. So, and then I said, okay, by the way, I might as well move then towards their kinesiology and the studies. And then I looked at the diagrams there and I couldn't believe my eyes, like basically this thing related to their like joints and the connections between them, that they were treated the same as the connection to the ground. I mean, like for me, that was it. It's like I couldn't believe it. And it's like, and these people, they are teaching us something. Like you see, look, it's a very simple thing. In the theoretical model of mechanics, the disconnection between the femur and the tibia, right? So you see the knee joint, the hip joint, and so on. They're treated exactly the same as the disconnection between the foot and the floor. I mean, this just blew my mind. I mean, like, guys, how can you possibly do that? I thought that I got the wrong book. Like and I thought that maybe there was just like the introductions, and maybe there's because in system science it doesn't work, right? So you see, like, compare the two, the ease of the disconnect, how easy it's to disconnect the foot from the floor, and like the femur from the tibia. Obviously, these are different things. But if they are treated theoretically and quantifiably, and like through the modeling, they're treated the same, for me that was the end of it. It's like, guys, this cannot be. So that if your model treats the same these two completely different categories, the model is wrong. You cannot use it. So that was, for me, that was the departure, which happened, I don't know, like maybe I was 21, 22, something like this. So it was like beginning of 93, well, it was around 93, 94. So that means that it's 27 years of deep dissatisfaction, right? So I was like really dramatically dissatisfied with the biomechanical model. It just didn't fit. And then I went into trying to find what would be the better one. And I sort of started scouting all sorts of mechanics, biomechanics, let's say moved into, I first tried more, like the higher levels of the mathematics, and moving into the more abstract things, into the topology and so on, and I had all sorts of kind of shifts in that dimension. And I was not aware of the tensegrity, because basically Fuller is obviously not in any kind of standard mathematical reasoning about it. And the other thing that I observed was that basically that children with cerebral palsy, when you observe them, they are the ones, their ballistic effects in them. So then you basically see it, basically they fit more into the model of the standard biomechanics. So the worse is the child, the worse is the condition, the closer the performance is to the standard biomechanics. So that was my profound dissatisfaction. And then I was moving in all sorts of ways. And here I connect to Susan in a way that I accidentally met Tom Myers in 2004. It was this ill-fated International Symposium on the Studies of Touch in Montreal, which I visited by a pure accident, and I saw that tensegrity toy. And then in the tensegrity toy, the fact that you squeeze 2 bars, and then the thing, instead of expanding according to Poissonic ratio, it actually compacts, like does the impansion and then does the expansion. That absolutely blew my mind. I mean, like, as a person who's been trained conventionally, who's been going through whatever linear algebra, differential geometry and so on, I suddenly realized, wow, this is the thing that I have never, ever possibly, let's say never, ever imagined. And, those were several busy years, but even then, he didn't mention biotensegrity back then. It was just the tensegrity. And then it was 2009 when at Amsterdam's Fascia Congress, I kind of made 2 seminal experiences. So one was the famous lecture of Jaap van der Wal about thinking transanatomically, and the other was attending the workshop of Stephen Daniel. So, and for me, that was really like the thing. I say, geez, this is the geometry they've been looking for. By then it was like 15 years. So you see, it wasn't the shining light. It was the dramatic dissatisfaction that was actually, kicking me in the butt. So that would be this way, right? And so what I'm trying to do, I'm just trying to get this whole field into sort of just organized as much as possible to the standards of the codification, and kind of, my probably main contribution there is that trying to get back to the original works of Fuller and all the other things, and kind of also connect it with the mathematical fields which are exploring it, so the superstability and so on. So just kind of I'm trying to bring the mathematics more into this thing and give it the human face, right? So you see, link it to the pragmatic experiential, everyday things which are happening, right? So that's you, in that sense, getting back to Doug and his weightlessness and the experience of magic, right? So you see that we have to justify and actually, get this proper codification to magic. Let's say if this is the ambition, right? So you see, codify magic, right? And in all sorts of varieties, and make it less intimidating, and get into be ready is to move into the unknowns. So I guess that's the part that we had as our introduction there. I hope it resonates there. And the plan was to move into the questions and actually into the field of the pragmatic applications, right? Susan,
But
shall
also,
you?
yeah, Leonid, we 2 names keep coming up. In addition to Steve's and Daniel Claude Martin's, Jaap van der Wal and Maren Deel, and they're both here. So maybe we could get a word from the 2 of them.
Oh, guys, maybe
What?
let me just throw one word, right? So one word.
Yes.
So because here, what the thing
Here,
that Graham,
Leonid, your sound has changed.
my sound, because I was drinking tea. Okay, I forgot to put it down. Okay, so I just wanted to mention one word, right? So you see, look, I'm a very theoretical guy to begin with, right? It's like I basically dissect things with my mind. But I just wanted to say that if you look at it, Graham, he started, he is a builder since childhood, right? So you see, then in that sense, the experience of building, the experience of kind of sensing the behavior, Graham, Chris, Susan. So this, you can really sense how much the building itself means. And for me as well, at the end of the day, it wasn't even the building, it was this experience of the of the ecstatic experience just blew my mind. So in that sense, no matter how much you try, you have to get into the hands-on experience to sense this behavior, right? And I'm just was leaving Doug a little bit out, not out of disrespect, because but more out of the fascination with his ability around the piano, which I thought, I don't think it's easily replicable. I'm just kind of keeping into the higher regard. Yeah, that's it. Yes, Susan, you want to
So
Go ahead, Maren. Yeah.
Yes.
Maren, are you ready?
Oh, she was. Now she's disappeared.
Yes, nearly. Wait.
Oh, there she is.
Hi, I've been all day long with my dog at the hospital because he is sick, so I came late.
Oh,
Just jumped in. You want to know something about my way to biotensegrity, right?
yeah, that's great.
Okay. I think I came to biotensegrity because everything else I was told, similar to Leonid, it didn't work. It made no sense. When I heard the first time that there's something like biomechanics, I said, can't be. And then everybody said, oh, it's important, you have to learn it, and it's the greatest thing ever, and if you know that, you can do everything. I thought, okay, I have to learn that, and I learned about biomechanics, and it didn't work, and it still made no sense, and the more I learned and the more I tried, the less it worked. And then I found Meyer's book about the anatomy trains. And I thought, oh, there must be something like that in horses too. And then there was a little picture with a biotensegrity model. And I thought, oh, that must be important, but I don't get it with that picture. And I called Danielle Claude Martin and went to Munich and had one day with Danielle. And after that, everything was great.
And Maren, your background is that you're an equestrian, but also you've done martial arts, and I know you do permaculture. So you work with biology across many scales.
Yes.
So shall we pass it to Yap because he has to leave soon? So
yes,
we have
yes, please. Yeah. Yup, are you here?
Let me
Yes.
find him.
There he is.
Unmute him, or maybe Mariana's unmuted.
He's got it.
There he
He's
is.
unmuted.
It's very simple. I was raised as an anatomist, and I learned to talk about locomotion. And locomotion was that a skeleton was moved by muscles, and I believed in it and I worked at it. But then, yeah, there came one day that I start to realize that it's not the skeleton that is moved by another tissue or another muscles or other structures, but that the skeleton is one, and that the connections, the connective tissue and the muscle, kind of connective tissue, is the two. Actually, I had to leave the Holy Trinity of anatomy, and it was the bones, the bands, and the muscles. And I came to a model or to a concept of two. You have pressure, you have tension. You have the skeleton, and you have the connections. And the connections could be muscle, could be connective tissue, most of the time are a combination of it. So I came to the two. And that I knew from my embryology. Life is about two. Life is not about one. There's always the other. There's always the polarity of concentration, decentration, expansion, impansion. Everything is always about two. And that is when I met biotensegrity as the truth. Because biotensegrity, the first thing I realized, this is not about motion. This is about shaping. And that was a way to overcome my anatomy, because anatomy is about death. It's about structure, it's about anatomy, it's about space. And locomotion is not about space, it's about space and motion, space and time, time and whatever. So I found back the two, and that is why I'm looking for a definition that biotensegrity is for me the confirmation that life is polarity, that life is two, that life is yin and yang, but also neither yin nor yang. So it's not the struts or not the cables are the important ones. It are not the cables moving the struts or the struts connecting the or separating the cable. It's the two is the one. The two is an interaction, and that is why I was so well really. I was struck by that model. That's what I, yeah. But that's what where I found back the reality of life as being the two, and so that's my travel. I started with the three. I had to overcome thinking in three. I started to think in dynamos and skeletons, and I recognized that is biotensegrity. It's the model of shaping. It's a model of gestaltung. It's a model of, yeah, creating a dynamic space. And that's why I love that fantastic definition of Graham. Graham, please write it down, put it on the screen, and, advocate it to the world. That's the real definition. Thank you very much.
Which one? Thank you, Jaap.
The last one, the shortest one, about anatomy and stability. Yeah.
Yes, I'll put it in the chat. Anatomy is biotensegrity describes the anatomy of stability and change.
There it
Yes,
is.
that's
And the
it.
two types of
Time
anatomy
and
the two
space.
types of, yes.
There have been a lot of people asking you to put that in the chat, Graham.
And I think that we're sort of making the assumption here, right, that everyone that's here knows about all of Steve's papers, has read everything Steve's written, has listened to Steve's video. That's the original authority for all of this, right? From which we've learned from him, right? And has access to Graham's book and Mar's book and Daniel Claude's book and all of that stuff and all of these tea parties. So I think Leonid's point that it is multifaceted also needs to be recognized. This is, for me, with the martial arts experience, that's that whole thing, right? There's yin and yang, and inside the yin there's yang, inside the yang there's yin. It's a whole system concept that does have a duality that is active and constantly changing. So we have a number of other people here who have done a lot of teaching in biotensegrity. So
shall we?
yeah, I think we can also let people, what do you think, Chris?
So Susan, we were going to try the raise hand sort of way of going
Yeah,
about it. We've
yeah,
got so many comments coming in. It's already almost 11:30. And also I noticed you had tagged Carol Davis to come up and speak. Shall we have Carol first, and then I'll talk about the raised hand function and how we're going to try and move it forward?
Yeah, or you can talk about raised hands first, and so everybody knows, and we can also turn on our videos now, I think, everybody, right?
That's a great idea. So please turn on your videos. And what we're going to try today, because the chat is going crazy and there are 77 people here on the call, is to take advantage of some of the Zoom functions. Now, part of the BiotensegriTea party is a discussion, social event, and we've got lots to talk about. We started with definitions of biotensegrity from written from publications. We've talked about the tensegrity, biotensegrity, applied biotensegrity, inspired biotensegrity. We've talked about what brings people to what makes people jump on board. And so I know everybody has a story. What we would like to do to try and keep things moving along is have you raise hands. In order to do that, if you're on a computer, take your cursor down to the bottom where it says reactions. If you click on that, you'll see a bunch of symbols. And I'm going to listen carefully. I'm going to let you know something. If you click on one of the symbols above, that's clapping or thumbs up, hearts, you can do that. It will show up on your screen. and then it will disappear and you will lose your place in line. So if you want to speak, if you have a question, a comment, you're going to click on the raised hand icon. That will enable me to look and see. Doug's got his thumbs up, to look and see who wants to contribute to this discussion. And then we'll see if we can manage the time so that everybody who wants to speak can.
We have a lot of amazing experts in the field here. A lot of people who have written great papers, done a lot of teaching. I mean, a lot, like 15 anyway, I think. So please be patient. Let's get to everybody we can.
Okay, so if you do want to, we're going to start with you, Carol. And meantime, anybody who wants to jump on board, please raise your hand. We'll try and get to everybody. So far, nobody's raised their hand. Oh, there's only one person, so that means there's no time limit. But first, Carol, please. Where is Carol?
Carol cannot unmute.
Now I can.
So we have to allow. Thanks,
I got it.
Mariana,
Thank you.
for hearing that.
Well, this has just been very, very interesting, and multifaceted, and it put me in touch with all the different ways that I've come into contact with biotensegrity. The first was before the 2016 Fascia Research Congress. I was invited to come to talk about my particular background, which was with Barnes myofascial release. And what I realized was I was learning a lot of new terms that I already had an idea in my mind, but I didn't have a name for it. I was educated very classically in a master's degree in physical therapy, levers, fulcrums, all that. I knew that wasn't true, but I knew that that's the best that we could do. And those were the names that were given to it. But I acted as if it weren't true. Now, all of a sudden, somebody was giving me the truth. But, you know, it really didn't come alive in the beginning sense. It's come alive in a much fuller sense through these discussions and later on. But it was in 2018, I think, that I went to John Sharkey's fascial anatomy course. And already I was paying attention to Joanne Avison and how she was expressing herself at the Levin course before the Fascia Research Congress. Because I really love the way Joanne talks about form and symbols in a larger framework. And then when I went into John Sharkey's course, all of a sudden, and Graham was there, and Chris and Jan and I sat down with Graham, and we made our little biotensegrity forms. That's back when I could use my fingers. And I began to get what Susan Lowell says. You have to feel it, what's happening as you're doing this. But then during that course, John would take us to the anatomy, and as lifelike as we can make it in death. All right, the equilibrium was there, Leonid, but the structure was demonstrating through what we were doing to it, how this would come alive in a living person. And I'll never forget Joanne taking the tongue all the way down to through the heart to the diaphragm, and how our mouths are connected to our hearts. And the whole concept of the dynamics of push and pull that never rest. That to me is really the foundation of life. And it was what I was feeling under my hands when I treated patients. So I just, like you, Chris, I just keep learning more and more and more, and I keep writing it down. And I apply it to yoga, and I apply it to my own practice. And then Susan's book came out, and all this wonderful stuff on art and history. And then Doug tunes me into my own Aunt Emily, who studied Alexander to teach piano. And my whole life has come together in these concepts. And I think that's what this does. This pulls us together, the science that pulls us together structurally and functionally to explain the fullness of life. And that's the way I would put it.
Thank you, Carol. And next we will have Diane. But before Diane, before you speak, I got a message from Jan, and there's a lot of people here and only Diane has her hand raised. So apparently not everybody has that ability to raise your hand. If you would like to speak then, and you don't have a hand to raise, please type 3 questions into the chat box. Rachel, I don't see you. Maybe we could have another team member back Rachel up and just keep track of the order.
Well,
put it on my WhatsApp group.
Chris, I think you mean put 3 question marks at the beginning of your statement in the chat, which will alert people to the fact that you want to speak. Yeah.
Thank you. And Lisa's going to back us up. So Lisa and Rachel, if you can track the people and the order and send it to me on our WhatsApp group, then that will hopefully give everybody the opportunity, because I see people here. I'm looking at John Sharkey having his tea. I'm looking at Anna Kroll. I'm looking at people who have been to big, and nobody's got their hand up except for Diane. Go ahead, Diane.
Thank you. My question is for you, Chris. You were speaking about the 2 types of yoga that you had experienced, and you started with Ashtanga. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And you went to Vishana. Is that the right word?
Vishana yoga. Yeah.
Vishana yoga. Okay. And that helped you with this shift. Could you say something about choose one sequence or moment and compare the 2? I'm interested in the quality of the 2 and what was it that made you shift?
Okay, that's a big question. So in Ashtanga yoga, it's very externally oriented. Put yourself into the shape of a pose. And learn certain sequences, and you advance. It's also very patriarchal, top-down teaching, which doesn't actually really resonate with me. Vijnana yoga, we begin with these principles of quiet mind. So that's an invitation to presence, awareness, and relaxed body, which is really not that slump on a couch, but that's the ease. That's the maximal efficiency that we have when we balance tension and compression. The principle of rooting is how we touch the ground. And connecting is balancing and integrating tension and compression. And there are others as well that I won't go over.
Okay.
So the difference is, instead of just plunking myself down and being either putting myself into a pose or being put into a pose, I enter into my body, feel the touch of my feet on the floor and the whole body. So there's an awareness of the whole body, and start exploring. For example, triangle pose, which most people know. I'm not going to demonstrate it, but in Ashtanga, I remember we were taught like as though you were between 2 pieces of glass. Very like carpentered environment. Square your hips or open your hips. Very warrior 1, you were to put your knee over your ankle and not past. Whereas in the Vijnana practice, we feel our feet, we're tapping into the breath and the ascetic nature of the breath, and beginning to explore. For example, if you were to just explore the way that moving the hand influences the whole body, I might explore that and find the whole body shape shifting towards that final pose,
right,
towards the opening that might be invited, but it's not the destination, it's the exploration and the journey.
So it was more of a process-oriented approach as opposed to a goal-oriented approach. That's one thing. That's one way of saying.
Yeah, I guess it is.
That's what I'm hearing from you. Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Okay, Anastasia, let me, there we go.
I'm only unmuting myself to help people find the hand raise function.
Okay.
If you go to participants at the bottom of your list and you click on participants, and you'll see the window pop up on your right. At the very bottom on the left of that window, it says raise hand. Do you see that?
I do see that. Anastasia, while you're unmuted, do you have anything that you would like to share with us?
Oh, sure. I can tell
Yeah,
you
because
my,
Anastasia, you're one of, I mean, there are over 20 people among us right now who are writing or teaching about biotensegrity, easily over 20. So the more we hear from, the better, right? Go ahead, Anastasia.
okay, well, my mind was blown in 2014 when I met Steve Levin at a dinner, and he just casually said, well, of course our bones don't actually touch. There's space there. And I was like, well, of course, but in Feldenkrais teaching, we're always talking about creating that compressive force through the skeleton. And I don't know, something resonated there, and then my whole mind was blown. But that was my little beginning, 2014. Although as a cell biologist, I knew about the work at the Wyss Institute, the wonderful stuff that had been done with cells, and how cells, I've done lots of looking at creating thin slice images of what happens inside cells, and had reconstructed models of styrofoam, of all sorts of things like chloroplasts, and thought, this stuff's all moving around. How does it know where to go? How does it know how to move about in the cell? So I think that was always there in the background from the 80s. And then the whole concept that Steve presented was mind-blowing. I was like, okay, this is what now makes sense. So that's my little story.
Thanks, Anastasia. Okay, and Susan, you want to say anything, or shall I ask Anna to unmute? You're muted, so.
Hi.
Hi, Anna.
Hello. Hi. I would just thank you for this. This is just incredible. I've written so many notes. I've got so many things. I would absolutely love to hear what Joanne Avison and Jan Travada have to say. I find them both just incredibly inspirational speakers, and they're both here. And I would love to know their thoughts if they're up for talking.
I suspect they
just need to tell them how to use the function of raising their hand. That's it.
Yeah.
No, they can send us a text. Or go ahead.
Yeah, they can do the text. Jan, Joe, and who would like to go first among you?
Why don't we ask Jan to go first, because she was the one that originally gave me a message saying I can't find my raised hand. Joe, if you can, I'm assuming I can't see you, Joe, but if you can just give me a thumbs up that you can be after, or type in the chat that you're ready after Jan, then we'll get you set up for that. Okay, Jan.
And a lot of people have also asked for John Sharkey to speak. So John, if you're still here and you're ready to go after Joanne, we could do that. And I really don't have a chance to much look at the chat. So
no, me neither. So that's why we've got Rachel and others watching. So we're going, go ahead, Jan, then Joe, then John.
Thank you. I'm not sure, Anna, what you wanted me to speak about.
Well, I thought you had your hand up. I thought you wanted to,
no, I didn't
share.
But also, Jan, you can tell us how you, what was your aha moment for biotensegrity that Leon has been asking people for.
Yeah, well, you know, I started the British Fascia Symposium 2014, and big confession, I didn't really know an awful lot about fascia. I'd done a bit and looked, but I did know my whole gut told me this was really important, and I knew that I was working with the fascia. It's just we'd never been told we were working with fascia, and this is all so exciting. After a few years of going into the fascia and going to the Fascia Research Congress, and I just thought, now we're going to have to start something up. So anyway, all these applications, we put the call for applications out, and then came one from somebody called Joanne Avison about Is Biotensegrity, and I thought, oh my God, what on earth's that? So anyway, luckily some people on my committee did know, and we decided to accept her. So she was a main stage speaker, and she stood up there with her models, and I thought, yeah, I can understand that. And afterwards I thought, well, I can't explain any of that. What was it all about? But I knew inside me that this is the way we work. And I thought, well, I never did really understand all this levers business anyway. And that was it. And I was so lucky, Joe, I was so lucky. I got to know you. And she very kindly after a while invited me to join the big group, the Biotensegrity interest group. And that was just, phenomenal. I turned up there and I thought, I know nothing, I absolutely nothing. And I sat there and I listened for a few years, and I listened, and eventually decided to write the book about scars in the biotensegral body. And again, that came from a suggestion from Jo, because I wanted to write, and I couldn't quite understand, think, what aspect shall I write about? And she said, well, why about biotensegrity? And I thought afterwards, well, obviously I'm not going to do that because I don't know enough about it. Oh, thank you, Susan. But I don't know enough about it. And then I thought, but I do know some people who do. And I thought, I don't have to write the whole book. They could help me. They could do it. I can write about the stuff I know about, So, and of course, in writing it, I learned a lot about biotensegrity. And it was, at that level, it was a steep learning curve. And I still find it a steep learning curve because I feel like I'm one of those people, I don't know what I don't know, which is amazing, isn't it? I don't know what I don't know. Yet I know a heck of a lot more than I used to. And I get excited, I get passionate about it. And I try and explain it to people. I'm getting better, and trying to recruit the science and get the language. And I'm waiting for the dictionary to be released, please, whoever's working on that. And I'm bringing it more and more, of course, now into the Fascia Hub and the events. The Fascial Foot is all biotensegrity. Managed to get speakers who are totally biotensegrity informed, which is brilliant. So I'm bringing it in. And I learn more all the time. Just all the time. But when I work on scars, that's, I think, when I really feel it, because I can be working on the cesarean section and the cascade of response as the scarring loosens and softens, gets more reintegrated into the fascial matrix, and you can feel that cascade going all the way down to the toe or up into the shoulder or whatever. And of course, I went on the dissection course with John, and I was on Joanne's dissection table, and that was again more aha moments. But when we dissected, Joanne dissected, we all dissected under her guidance the left shoulder anterior, and then the right ankle, I think it was, and then we moved the ankle, and we could see the movement in the shoulder, and I went, oh my God. It actually does happen. What I think happens actually happens, and that was huge as well. So yeah, and a constant excitement, some confusion, battling my way through, and thank goodness we've got all these people to guide us.
Thank you, Jan. And can I just give a plug for Handspring Publishers? They are not just a sponsor of the Biotensegrity Party events, but we have how many Handspring authors here today? Graham, Susan, Jan, Jo. I'm sure there are probably others as well. So
Leonid and John are in Jan's book.
That's right.
Yeah. And yeah.
And John and Jo and Graham. Yes.
Graham, yeah. And I know there are others that are making contributions to upcoming books. So please, please, please support Handspring Publishing. We want them to keep going. And I know, Jo, you've been hard at work. So are you ready to share, Jo?
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't unmute. Hi, thanks. Well, in the spirit of today, sharing our personal stories, I met Tom Myers before Anatomy Trains happened. And I was privileged enough to read the first proofs of that in the late 1990s, 2000, 2001 time. And it was Mary Law, who then became part of Handspring Publishing, who stuck her neck out and let Tom Myers, who wasn't a formal anatomist, go out in the world and write this book under Elsevier's guise, which was a real major step. It was a big clearing in the forest of a new way of looking at anatomy from what I call bits to bands. And of course, he introduced tensegrity, not biotensegrity. But I was lucky enough to be probably as maverick as Tom in my own way. So I went digging around tensegrity and Buckminster Fuller and Donald Ingber, and discovered Stephen Levin and his website. And at the time I was being asked to present a program called the Fascia Talk Show. I was working with Robert Schleit by then. And the Fascia Talk Show, I did a presentation on biotensegrity because I was absolutely fascinated by it and honoured Steve Levin right the way through. And at the end of it, I'll never forget as long as I live, there was a message at the bottom of the presentation, and Susan Lowell, who was in it, had written, "I just want you to know Steve Levin was watching that." And it was one of those moments in life when you see your life go in front of you. Every slide went. I have a real thing, and that is about giving credit where credit is due. So thank God.
Joe, you did such a wonderful job. I just happened to be at Steve's that day, and I said, you know, you might want to see this, and he did. So,
well, I think we became friends then, and I remember in 2012 we were in Belgium together, and I kept saying, "You've got to write a book, Steve. You've got to write a book," and he accused me of being a nudge. And well, I just nearly drove him mad at the time. And then around that time, Graham's book was coming through, and Handspring and so on. And I was writing mine. So I asked him to help me write about biotensegrity in my book, which that was back in 2015. And then at that British Fascia Symposium event that you talked about, because I was in total deference, like, "Steve, I can't do this." And Steve was like, "Well, I'm not flying to British Fascia Symposium. You're going to have to do it." And I felt this onerous responsibility to do an awful lot of homework in this presentation. And John Sharkey was doing a workshop at the same time. And I think we met there. And subsequently, I started to find out some of the background of Tom Meyer's work was resourced from John Sharkey. And John, who I honestly believe to be one of the most generous, well-informed and genius people at making these concepts that are extremely difficult. I mean, you've just seen all the protagonists in this program have all thrown out all these definitions, and some of us get them, some of us don't. Some people understand them. There's stuff in the chat saying, "Please make it clear." And the truth of the matter is, John hasn't really changed his tune for several years. He's totally devoted to Steve's work. He understands this, and he translates it into anatomy formally and informally. And he's actually dedicated his life to changing the curriculum in universities, because that's what we're all doing here. And it's going to take all of us. It's going to take a collective. And it's not just about us having a nice idea. What we've got to take so much care over is that we honor Steve's idea from tensegrity, understanding the difference between tensegrity and biotensegrity, understanding that it's not an alternative model. It's actually an explanation of nature and how nature moves around and how nature organizes water that can get up and walk around. And that, for me, is what biotensegrity is. It's the living animation. And my own studies, and I'll finish with this, are in spiritual sciences. And my excitement was when I understood that the geometry, and this is a word I haven't heard used very much today, the geometry of form, geo, earth, metry, mater, and meter. So the measure of Mother Earth. And what biotensegrity actually does is incorporates that geometry and explains how it's already incorporated in the embryo. Every one of you self-assembled. And you may not have an explanation for how you did that, but you may not be able to intellectualize how you did that, but you already did that. And nobody bolted limbs on separately, but we still live under that spell that they did, and that they're mechanical and that they're levers, which, as Carol said so beautifully, doesn't make sense. But we haven't got an alternative science yet, which is what we're forging here. So don't underestimate what you're all doing by 1 nanometer, because that's what we're doing. And we've got people like John Sharkey with gold standard peer-reviewed research. So I'm going to challenge you on that, Susan. There is gold standard peer-reviewed research out there that we can use, that's growing, that's evolving. And, you know, the work of Donald Ingber has incorporated that. And Steve's the first one to say that. And Steve's papers and the body of work that Steve has done before, during, and after the formality of the archive is just so valuable to all of us. And
I'm not sure, Joe, what you mean. I was saying that there are people here today, several of them, who have done those research papers and who are also teachers. Did I miss? I'm sorry.
The way it came across, anyway, it doesn't matter. But anyhow, we're just honoring everybody here, of course. And from my point of view, the spiritual nature of us, there is a geometry of consciousness in the studies I've been fortunate enough to undertake. And that geometry is the geometry of sound waves and light currents and how the body uses them. And biotensegrity is already there. I think what all we're doing is pulling out the distinctions so that we can use it. And the reason I think it's so tolerant is because it's universal. And I totally endorse what Leonid said at the beginning. The fact that there's so many different answers to the question is actually its strength, that it could just open its arms wider and evolve and include more.
Thank you for that, Joe. And also thank you for writing your book, because that's actually what brought me into this community. When I read that book, it's like, she's actually understanding this and in the body. And I really appreciate that, because my life has changed significantly from reading your book. And I also want to give a shout out to John and Joe, both of whom I think were, people talk about Tom Myers clearing the path for us to move forward, bringing tensegrity to the body. And John and Joe, you get out there, in those early stages, out in social media and in the public. John doing the dissection, the biotensegrity informed dissection, that has been really pivotal for all of us. I also want to just say, on behalf of the archive, please jump in for any of the board members to correct me when I get led astray. But one of the things that we really are representing, are trying to do, is help bring biotensegrity, I say, to the streets, but actually that's my language, not archive language, but into as a science, forwarding biotensegrity as a science, bringing it to academia. More of that's happening, and that's really exciting.
Can I follow up with that?
Say that Steve, has said to me, I'm interested in the mystical aspect, and I would talk to Steve about that, and he would say, I can't remember, I stick to the body, I leave the rest to you, which gives me a nice, I can be passionate about this. And I also have a very spiritual side. So how do we navigate that? Go ahead, Susan.
Oh, no, I just wanted to follow up with what Joanne was saying about the water getting up and walking around. That concept I first learned about from Timothy Allen, who is a sort of complexity biology professor emeritus, old friend of Steve's. His book, Toward a Unified Ecology, featured a chapter of Steve's talking about biotensegrity in 1992, and was just done as a second edition a couple of years ago. And I put his talk about the water getting up and walking around in a link to that in the chat. And I think it would be great for people who are interested in that to listen to that and then link it to the things Jerry Pollack was telling us about a few tea parties ago. So that's just to bolster up what Joanne was talking about.
And just one last thing.
Shall we give the stage to John? Let's say he is not recognizable now, but
what is that too? Yeah.
Yes, but Joanne has one more comment.
And that is that it's my great pleasure to just to be able to announce, like as of a week ago, that the second edition of my book's coming out on the 5th of April. There's a whole chapter devoted to fluid dynamics, which I've dared to bring into biotensegrity a lot. And goodness knows.
And you talked about it. If people look in the tea parties, we had a whole interview with you about your second edition in the previous season. So guys, you should check that out.
And also Karen Kirkness, I'd like to shout out for, who's really just produced a book called Spiral Bound. Really look out for that, because her work is absolutely beautiful. She's a brave pioneer, and she's doing a lot of movement work along with Rachel and Lisa and Paul and Anastasi and Maggie and Yasmin and Mark and everybody that hi, all of you, that they're really pioneering into the actual different physical realms, not just yoga. And Karen's integrated not so much the consciousness aspect, but the spiral nature, the 5 filaments she calls it. And I think it's going to challenge Mr. Myers.
Can't wait to read it. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
I've got a contribution in Karen's book too, which is also exciting. John, are you ready?
Yes.
Ready for what?
He has
Well,
to
I'm sure you have something to say that you want to share to us.
I mean, he has to reintroduce himself and say, "I'm still John Sharkey reborn." You know, like this is the new goatee. It's just it's a new style
Yes.
altogether.
This is just a reflection
And
of
tell us how you
COVID-19.
came. Yeah, and tell us how you came to Biotensegrity.
Okay, well, so I don't want to bore people to death because it's one of these strange things when you look back at your life. You look in the mirror and you see yourself and you realize, oh my God, I'm 60 this year, 60 years of age. That's young in the scheme of things, but there's a life lived. And when you start to look back at it, I was just incredibly fortunate in terms of the journey that I took. I could have turned left, I turned right, and I bumped into Dr. Leon Chaitow. And I turned left and I could have turned right, and I bumped into Dr. David Goodman Simons of Travell and Simons. And, Professor David Simons became my mentor. Leon Chaitow, who passed away in 2018 prematurely. And I'm still gutted by that to this very day. It really impacts me, because he was such a generous individual, founder of the Journal of Bodywork and Movement Therapies, and opened so many doors for me and introduced me to so many people and really influenced my life. But back in the early 80s, working with Professor Simons and with Janet Travell, my path passed the same path as Dr. Levin. We can't remember exactly when we first met, but I mean, it's that long ago. It really is. And then I think we were at the International Fascial Research Congress in, where was it? In Holland, in Amsterdam.
Yeah, that's 2009, yeah.
2009 was it? Thanks, Leonard. And I remember that Dr. Levin approached me. We'd been communicating for a long, long time at that point, but he approached me and asked me would I, be interested in helping to, set up the Biotensegrity interest group and join the first meeting. And of course, I said to him, "Look, I'm on board. I'm happy to be involved in any particular way I can." So, we'd been communicating for years and years. Joanne Avison came up to me at the British Fascist Symposium. What year was that, Joanne? Which one was that? Anyway, you come up to me.
She said it was 2016. It would have been the first one, I think she said.
I think it was the first one, the very first one. Yeah, that's what it was. And I didn't know Joanne at that stage, but I went and did my homework because I was thinking, who is this person coming up to me saying, we need to speak, we need to talk? And I was saying, okay. So I went and did my homework. And of course, I discovered then that Joanne had written this book. And I said it to Joanne, I said, the book you've written, I said, I'm writing a book at the moment. I said, but I'm not going to write it now because you've just written the book that I was going to write. Really, she did such an amazing job. And the other aspect is that there were aspects to what it is that I teach that I was holding back. There were beliefs, philosophies, models. And I wasn't brave enough to be able to bring it forward, because there are certain topics that if you discuss, then within medicine, within academia, you could really damage your career. And it wasn't until I met Joanne that Joanne, I suppose, gave me the strength and the also helped me with the language to be able to feel brave enough to bring these ideas forward. Because Joanne came from a different background, and I call Joanne the airy fairy. And I'm always saying to Joanne, be careful with your language, be careful with your words, just be careful how you explain something, because in science, there's a need to ensure that you can back up what you're saying, with empirical peer-reviewed science. But having said that, if not, you have to you can say that you have an opinion and a hypothesis, but just be careful about the language. And Joanne has such a grasp of beautiful vocabulary. And you can see that, for instance, I mean, Karen Cook-Ness's new book is going to be out soon. And what an amazing book that's going to be. I've read it all from beginning to end, and it's an amazing book. And Joanne had a big impact on that. So that's where I am. I don't know if that's enough for you, but it's amazing the people that, as I said, that I've met over the years, who, even David Simons and Janet Travell, I think that they were talking biotensegrity, but they just didn't realize they were talking it. They just didn't have the language that we are now, culminating and putting into place. And then it's just been a great honor to have Graham Scarr and Leonid and others who've attended the biotensegrity dissection courses over the years. Carl Davis, oh my God. I mean, the people that have arrived, to participate and to learn, that's just been such an honor to be able to have these people. I'm looking at across at the faces. I can see Sean Beakey there, and the guys who came from, from his community. Sean, year and year after year, and these guys have contributed so much, and they've got so much to offer as well. And there's Fiona Webster, and just so many of you guys. It's fantastic to see you all here. You've all had such an impact on my work, and I hope I've had an impact on yours. And we always honor Dr. Stephen Levin, because boy, does he bring, every single time we have a meeting, every time Stephen brings something new to the table. He always, just an amazing. And so I always say, I try to be as honest as I possibly can. I always say I don't think I've ever had an original thought. I think what I try to be is a mini Dr. Stephen Levin. That's what I try to be.
If we can all just get a little bit of him and his genius, just think of where we will go.
He's just such a generous character as well. Stephen,
as are you, John. You've been very generous and so humble in your speaking today.
Well,
and I'm
Stephen
sorry,
he shares all the time. He wants to, Stephen says things to me like, I'm the old man now sitting on the bench in the park throwing bread to the birds. Not at all. Not at all. Every time you think that maybe Stephen, has had a last word, no, he has something new. And, and it's not that it's brand new to him. It's just that he feels that now is the right time to introduce it. It's an amazing character.
He is. I think we all agree on that. And I'm looking at the time. We're 2 hours now live. I've been on an hour prior to that. I know Patricia had a question. She was next. Steve has his hand up. How do we want to manage this? I'm looking to you, Susan, and you, Graham, in terms of time.
Well, I mean, like, what's the, people, I think that, at the end of the day, those who cannot stay, they're leaving, right? But we still have 60 plus people on, and there are interesting things still coming. So why not? Since we have the flow, so let's go on.
Yeah,
okay.
I can stay on, and I know that we talked about Handspring authors. Carol Boggs is here, longtime DC Big member who contributed to my book.
And Anastasia and Doug as well.
Anastasia, Doug, who've already, and I know that that Eileen's been doing a lot of teaching, a lot of Traeger people here today. We've just got so many people. We could be on for hours, Leonid, but I'm good for at least a little while. And
okay, so let's do it. So because I think that we've got some good stuff there.
Eleanor Silverstein's here. She's also a Handspring author. She's contributing to the upcoming book that Anastasia's been working on.
They've got a tea party coming up, do they?
And they've got a tea party coming up with Chris Kresge.
So
anyway, I'll hand it over to you, Chris.
I'm just wondering, do you want to do sponsors now, or do you want to keep going and do them at the end?
Why don't we take a moment for the sponsors, the poor sponsors?
I have to leave soon anyway, so.
Okay,
well,
and then we can be more loosey-goosey.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll go to the sponsors then. Quick resume. Our BiotensegriTea Party is an all-volunteer production of the Stephen M. Levin Biotensegrity Archive and made possible through the generous support of our sponsors. Handspring Publishing have a wide range of authors and books available for movement and manual therapy professionals, and also produce a regular newsletter and ongoing webinar series with Elizabeth Larkham. Embodied Biotensegrity, who provide an excellent resource for those of you looking to learn more about biotensegrity. Artifact Pro in Madrid, Spain, pardon me, who produce wonderful tensegrity models. Biotensegrity Congress coming from Brazil, who will be running a series of workshops in English and Portuguese for movement teachers and manual therapists from April the 23rd to the 25th. And from the fasciahub.com, who are organising the Fascial Foot on Saturday, 8th of May, with John Sharkey, Wilbur Kelsick, Elizabeth Larkham, Philip Beach and Rachel Tudor. Early bird tickets available until the 5th of April. See more details in the chat for further details. Thank you. Back to
And
you.
did we get the Congresso? My mind wandered.
Oh, yes, I gave it in English, but Biotensegrity Congress, the Congresso in Portuguese. And I didn't mention Integrated Biotensegrity in Alberta, Canada, who I know have regular events, but I don't have any more details yet, but they've got a mention.
Yes, and
Okay.
matrix patterning also, and George Roth will be here in a couple of weeks, and there is a discount code for the Congress that's coming out of Brazil that Ana Altsubo is organizing, and it has
An early bird till the 15th on that.
No, take a look at what went in earlier today. Lisa has it. I think it might be till
Okay.
the 30th, and it will be in English as well as Portuguese. And yeah, and Mariana, are there 14 questions on YouTube? Is that what you're saying? No. Oh, okay.
So, Susan, tell us about next week.
Next week, don't be that guy. Anybody who's really interested in biotensegrity is keeping up with the conversation, which has been really fast moving over the last year. And so what we're going to be doing next week, because biotensegrity seems to be becoming a buzzword in more areas than we are able to currently keep track of, is common misunderstandings and pitfalls and that sort of thing. So if you've got any that you think are not yet on our list, let us know. And we're going to be talking about that. Thanks.
Okay, and do we want to do our toast now?
Leonid, can you toast?
Can
Leonid,
we
off camera.
Lena, you're there. It'd be great if you would toast Steve, following on
You might
John.
be getting more. You might be
He may
getting more
getting
tea.
his tea.
Doug, what about you?
Yeah, just Dr. Steve Levin, the father of us all here. Gross.
Yes.
Cheers.
Gambe.
And can I recommend that everybody here writes their own definition on biotensegrity and then compares it with what you've heard tonight and what you can read in books to see how they compare and move on, because as we refine definitions of biotensegrity, so we all move on.
Thanks,
wanted to-
Graham. And I'm going to give a little plug for the Biotensegrity Archive. Write your definition into the comments below this email, below the YouTube live. Share it with people. We're not expecting it. Let's not expect ourselves to be perfect, because we know how challenging this can be. But if we go and become more active, people will see you. They'll know you're involved in the conversation, and this will really help us bring this to the public, bring this to more people. And as you'll find out next week, there's lots happening. Okay, so next we have Patricia Hopper. Susan, I'm going to keep this on YouTube live unless you want me to turn it off.
No, I think that's good.
Yeah, good. And also, just don't forget to put likes, because that's how the algorithms know what to recommend people, right?
Yes, likes
on YouTube.
And also,
Yeah.
Leonid, do you know, does that have to be on the live, or do people have to wait?
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
So-
Algorithms love engagement. So you see, basically, that's what has to be told. The likes are essential in the way that they basically, when you got likes, then the algorithms start recommending it to people with similar interests.
And Leonard's our expert on algorithms. So I challenge everybody here to hop on board to YouTube this weekend and put some likes in there.
And you can put a like into any of them. I mean, you can go back in time. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, Patricia, are you able to unmute yourself? Where is she
He
here?
needs to unmute.
Okay,
Mariana's got it.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. So I was just saying in the chat that I was really enjoying hearing how everybody got hooked on biotensegrity. And I was also curious if the same speakers wanted to address the pragmatic consequences of biotensegrity, which was something that Leonid suggested that we might cover today. But at this point, that might be opening a whole nother can of worms. So I was thinking if Graham is still here, I would love to hear Graham answer that question if he hasn't already left.
Yeah, he might be gone.
I think he's gone.
Oh, okay. My second choice would be Carol Davis. Is she still here?
She is.
Okay. Well,
I think
anybody
she's
who
here.
speaks, if they're
she's here. Go ahead, Carol.
Well, Patricia, thank you for asking, because that's what it's all about, really, isn't it? That's why I'm here. It's to better understand how this comes alive in my practice. And when I talk with my patients about what's happening with the fascial web, with gentle pressure and elongation of my hands, and then waiting and feeling that flow, and I bring their attention to my hands. I say, do you feel my hands moving? Yes. I'm not moving my hands. You're moving my hands. And I show them the Gimbar toe screen, the fascial under the skin. I said, now you're going to feel this. This is what you're going to feel. The more my patients, my clients, can get into their bodies while I'm treating them, the more the wholeness of the healing process is able to be facilitated. And that's really what I want. I don't want this to be an intellectual exercise. And that's how I came into it. That's how I understood biotensegrity as an intellectual a way of describing. And it's the people here that we've heard from today that made it come alive for me. And Barnes did too, but I didn't have the ability to get inside myself. I had to do my own cleansing of my own stuff in order then to be able to be present in that way. And I think that that's true for many of us. But biotensegrity adds a framework for me in which I can then describe what patients and I are experiencing in the present moment in patient care. And then as an academic, what it does for me is give me a framework on which to write this for the next edition of my textbook that's coming out probably next year. And I always have a new chapter on science. As science evolves, I add, so this will be the 7th chapter on science of the science of fascia and biotensegrity as it evolves. So, but where the rubber meets the road, Patricia, is right in that moment with my hands and myself with my patient in that moment. And that's what makes all the difference.
Well, as always, beautifully put, Carol. You know, you are the true wordsmith of this world, you know, like, and this kind of ability to juggle their multiple layers and levels, you know, the strict academic and then, you know, getting into the realms of high domains. But, you know, I really wanted to hear from Stephen because, you know, see, he's been speaking there in the chat and raising the hands and, you know, like, and referring back to Buckminster Fuller himself, and actually even kind of getting some pedigree there of people who really got some direct dimension with it. So let's give him the stage, please.
I had the good fortune of coming across Bucky Fuller's work when I was back in high school. Read several of his books and heard him lecture a few times at Town Hall in New York City. And Then I studied for years with Moshe Feldenkrais. And if you want to look at a parallel to biotensegrity, Moshe's 1949 book, Body and Mature Behavior, really anticipates many of the scientific insights that Steve has now fleshed out.
But Steve, you have to. Steve is a longtime member, original member of BC Big, back from 2012 or whenever we first got it together, and he's also the originator of FlexAware. So I want to make sure everybody knows that, because he's not going to toot his own horn, but I will. Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah. So I studied with Feldenkrais and then began to look at how the Feldenkrais method could be taken even farther by making some of the concepts more explicit, and especially ideas about breathing and the whole system. And that's what led me to develop FlexAware, which I now sometimes describe as applied biotensegrity, and have that comment at the flexaware.com website. I first met Steve at a Buckminster Fuller conference in 2010. And after several brief conversations over the weekend, the last evening he came up behind me and whispered in my ear, "There's only one muscle." And then he quickly walked away before I could respond. And I phoned him a few days later and we talked about that. And the point that I want to emphasize in this conversation that I've discussed a bit in the chat is that for me, biotensegrity is the antidote or antithesis to anatomy. Anatomy starts with cutting up cadavers. And Leonid last week talked about the problems with Vesalius and seeing the spine as vertical. And it's the whole core of anatomy is cutting up cadavers and trying to label specific parts and seeing the parts as separate and somehow attached. Biotensegrity starts with whole systems, whole persons, at the molecular level, at the level of the cell, at the level of the organism, at how we function in society. So that's really the emphasis that I want to bring, that biotensegrity is a science equal to anatomy, the antithesis or antidote to anatomy. And it's a way of really thinking about whole systems. So it truly is a new paradigm in the literal sense of the term paradigm shift from Thomas Kuhn's book, which is a favorite of Steve Levin's and of mine, and I recommend to everyone. So thank you all. I'll look forward to our future conversations.
Well, maybe it's a good term, huh? You know, like the antidote to anatomy in that sense. So you see, because, you know, like when I talk about the anti-mechanics, so basically it's the same idea to a great extent, right? And I just don't know whether the word antithesis, sometimes the way it sounds a bit too heavy, right? So you see, for popular mind, but the antidote might be actually quite a light term. But look, the thing is that of course we all face the same problem, not just we, right? So you see that essentially that's the whole challenge of the system science, right? On the one hand, it just kind of comes into this field that, okay, so system is larger than the sum of the parts, right? So that's kind of, but in that respect, I love the points from Tom Myers, right? So when he brings this from time to time, saying, well, it's nice to talk about the whole, it's nice to talk about the, you know, that everything is connected to everything and so on and so forth, but how are we going to operate it in the sort of tangible way? And I think that that's one of the key difficulties that we are facing, that in that respect, we also have to remember, right? The basic thing is that if we get back to Fuller was a system scientist, right? So you see, for him, geometry wasn't a geometry, right? So you see, it was a diagrammatic way of exploring the connections of the system. So, and that's one of the key points which actually makes the whole thing very difficult, because, you know, like I've been working on Russian translation of Graham's book, and it turns out that Fuller has never been even remotely translated into Russian. So there is no references whatsoever. And as you go through this, you really, I mean, I just see this kind of the landmines in every single word. You know, like when Fuller meant physics, he didn't mean physics. You know, when Fuller said geometry, he didn't mean geometry. When Fuller said vectors, he didn't mean vectors. When Fuller said, so basically, he never, what the words that he's using, if we don't realize what they actually mean, we easily step into the landmines, and
Yes.
that's really the biggest problem. That, you know, like even if we get, for example, talking about the first principles, so, you know, we have to realize that our position, right? Because look, when you are coming to scientists and say, hey guys, I'm going to talk to you, you know, about in first principles, what is the most well-known example of first principles recently? So this is Mr. Elon Musk and his SpaceX. So basically, he said, guys, you know, he wanted to buy some rockets. The rockets were too expensive and outdated. He said, screw you, I'm going to get the rocket from first principles. So what? So that's when you say the first principles, you effectively you mean you are morons. You have completely screwed up. I have the courage to get back to scratch and redraw it from the beginning. And you know, this kind of message never sits well, right? So you see, and when we say, okay, for first principles, kind of nice and cutie, it's not nice and cutie. It's basically, it's the way of slapping the face, right? So that the saying that we have to get back to the first principles. So, and it starts from that we have to realize what our words mean. And in that sense, of course, we are touching multiple communities there. And what the experiences and the conversations that were coming today, they were very much coming, you know, like from when the word science comes up, it's sort of, it's some figures in, well, anatomy, some figures in biology and so on. But my point is that we have to realize, right? We have to realize that the science, you know, the real science that kind of gives everybody the, you know, the blessing at the end of the day, that's the sign which somehow related to physics, mathematics and so on. So we have to acknowledge, unless we build the bridge there, we will not get this blessing. And my main point is that Fuller has been kind of put into the, you know, oblivion because he didn't fit anywhere with his exploration. So you see, what he called geometry wasn't geometry, right? So in first place. So, but what we're observing, my main point today is that what we're observing today with the change to the computer science, right, to the change of the language, to the change of algorithms and so on. So if we start kind of reinventing it in a way that kind of re-extracting Fuller, because he doesn't fit well into the numbers, but he fits extremely well into codification. That's my main point, is that we know, like, what one of the key ideas that I'm trying to bring is that, guys, there's no point in trying to catch. It's too late. You know, let's say, whether you try to present it to anatomists, whether you try to present it to physicists, and, you know, whoever, it's too late. We are not going to fit. You know, the opposite move is actually to step ahead and say, hey, you know, we don't want to quantify, we don't want to, we just move ahead and say, well, but it yields codification. And codification leaves the room for the hidden layers. And in the hidden layers, we can have everything from, you know, let's say, space, universe, sacred geometries and everything else. So it could be there in the hidden layers. And for me, that's the only way how we can possibly solve this key challenge, because the key challenge is that we are somehow touching on this experiential and big connectedness, and at the same time we're trying to be recognized as a science, and like, which is a very difficult thing to juggle, right? So you see, like, how do we do this? And my answer is saying, hey guys, you know, like, actually things are not that bad. They're not that bad. You know, let's see, if we use the more modern language, if we move to the codification, so then we can actually plant both. We can have the hidden layers of the all the beauties and the interfaces and the connectedness and the, like up to the spiritual part. But then we have the, the pragmatic part of the actual, like the data streams, so where we can connect to the old science. So that's kind of, I sorry I took too much time, but I just got, the conversation about Fuller always kind of sort of has a click on me.
Can I jump in with something that takes it back to what Patricia was talking about, the pragmatic stuff? We have Sean Beakey here, who's an Amatsu practitioner. We have Marin, who's done internal martial arts, Wing Chun, and others. David and Mark are here for the first time. They're Wing Chun people. Paul Thornley, I know you're a martial arts guy. I know that even the more external martial arts all have an internal component. There are things that happen in the martial arts that are not well explained by conventional biomechanics at all. Okay, so the best push that I've ever had, right? You don't feel it on the side of your arm. It's very nonlinear. You may even have a moment of, oh, too bad that didn't work for that person. A little flash of that. And then your body goes up in the air and slams into the wall at an incredible rate of acceleration. It doesn't hurt. It sounds really bad when you think, oh my God, somebody threw you into the wall. No, you pay money to go to the seminars where the people are able to do this to you, and you feel nothing. You don't feel a shove. There's a connection that I think is about that interface that MJ talks about, that Carol Davis talks about, all of you manual practitioners. It is, in Tai Chi we say 4 ounces or fewer, but it's a connection that is not a me-you connection, but allows the two bodies to be in system with each other, so that when one thing moves, everything moves, so that a small change just gets transferred. And that is one kind of martial arts parlor trick that is not well explained by conventional biomechanics. And the other one, you can see this one, you can see both of these on YouTube all over the place, is the guy standing there and he has his arm out and somebody's pushing, a big person pushing on that arm, and then another person pushing on that person. Sometimes there's a line of 15 or 20 people and they're all pushing, and the person that's standing there with their arm out is very comfortable, okay, and not bothered by it. And what you can't see until you understand biotensegrity, what I couldn't see until I began to understand biotensegrity, is that all those big strong guys aren't pushing on that person's arm, they're pushing on the floor. But the integrated body allows that pressure to be multifractalized through the entire system and rejoined at the bottom of the foot, right? And where the foot meets ground. And that's where the pressure goes. So I think Amatsu, Sean, I think you've been trained in this for so many years. And I know Dennis Bartram, thank Dennis for me, that now he's got a few videos on YouTube that are easy to find. He's had some that are just oldies but goodies that I fell in love with many, many years ago. But Sean, maybe you could say a word about that. Do you want to unmute? Are you able to? You're nodding. Sean Beakey. Can he unmute?
There we go.
There we go.
Yes, indeed. To reflect what you're saying, I mean, it's the instantaneous evidence and full integration of the wake of the intention that appears to be everything and nothing at exactly the same time. And when one is witnessing this beautiful interaction between people, one realizes that actually the movement that we talk about, that we feel, that we see, was there before we started and will be there after we've ended. All we've chosen to do is to observe it at that moment in time. And it's that continuum that allows us to do what we do so well.
That's great.
I hope that gives it, and I'll absolutely pass on your good wishes to Dennis.
No, that's great. David and Mark, I know you're both in the same school. You guys have been studying biotensegrity in the context of your Wing Chun work. Did either one of you want to jump in or not? It's okay if you don't.
Susan, I'm gonna just let everyone on mute.
Yes, let anyone who likes.
But there, we have a raised hand. We have a raised hand from Anna.
Yes.
So
okay.
Obviously,
Hi.
people who respect the platform, they have to get the extra priority, right?
Oh yeah. Except I just asked David or Mark if they wanted to contribute, so I want to make sure. Shake your head or nod your head or unmute or. Okay, Mariana, can people unmute? Yes. Okay. All right. Go ahead, Anna.
I have a question for Leonid about this codification. Everything that you've said, Leonid, this time and last week, I find it really difficult to articulate the question that I want to ask, but because what you're saying is so all-encompassing. So where do we go next? I absolutely think, Leonid, that you're right, and but I don't know, what do we now do with this? How do we codify? Where do we go next? Everything that you said last time as well about just where do we go with it?
Well, good question. Well, first of all, right, on the practical side, what does it mean? That means that we have to bring the new practical maps to the anatomy, right? So,
yeah.
Which means if we kind of start moving further, if we are truly able to apply the biotensegrity, that means that we have the options of going in two ways, right? So one way would be the true Fuller way, right? So the true Fuller way implies what? Implies that what was his biggest change in geometry, right? His biggest change in geometry was, instead of thinking of the kind of vast expanse happening at once, right? So his main point was, okay, guys, we start with this mini cluster, we start with this point, and then we take this part of the space, and then we basically start moving from there. So in other words, what does it mean? So we take, for example, the peri-articular region and say, hey, what do we have today? Anatomy feeds us a very old map, right? So the very old map means that we have muscles as units. So is it good or bad? Of course, it's a silly thing. We have two ways of moving up. One way of moving up is saying, okay, we move up towards the ensembles, right? So you see, which is being presented more and more in terms of the, Jesus Christ, you see, which is being presented more and more in terms of their how the neuroscience looks at it, right? So the neuroscience tells us, well, it's not muscle by muscle, right? Goes in ensembles. However, there we come with the important question. And the important question is, can we get into the fractional muscular, fractional articular, fractional, let's say, fractional contribution? Because basically today, if you look at the main idea, the muscle gets activated as the unit, right? So you see, like the muscle belly contraction goes as a unit. So how do you engage and how do you codify and how do you map not the myotendinous connections, right? So you see that basically you move from the myotendinous connections, you move into the myomysial and how the different mysium things interact with each other. So that would be the first point, right? So which kind of fractional muscular ensembles could work around the joint? That's one thing. The second thing is that when we start with the idea of the joint and the range of motion, this is also a very questionable thing, because if you look and make a frequency analysis, how frequent the joint works at the different states, you will figure out that the actual joint mainly performs near the so-called mid-range. And then we can ask the other question: why our reference point in kinesiology is a peripheral joint? Why do we take the peripheral joint in all the biomechanics textbooks and take the elbow or the knee? Because it's a convenience, right? And then we try to explain the spine via the elbows, right? So you see, because no one has ever seen a single vertebra moving. It's always a set. But why do we make these explanations that, okay, it's a combination of 5-7 degrees of motion per, let's say per vertebra? Who said so? Why this mapping came up? Why they came up with the mapping? Why do we reflect the elbow onto the spine? Why don't we reflect the spines onto the elbows? So in that sense, I'm talking about the inductive approach. We forget the biotensegrity in that sense, right? On the big whole, we say, okay, look, we have this set of parts which were already handed to us, and that's they reflect some kind of reality. So we take the Fuller's approach and say, okay, these parts also have subparts. So how we can reconnect those parts and how we can flip the maps. That will be there. So in other words, I call this regional anatomategrities, if you want, right? So you see, basically regional, if you look at this way, what are anatomy trains of Myers? It's one particular form, one particular format of the anatomategrities. But you can make anatomategrities once you reinterpret everything as sesamoids, right? Take this, you take the example of the shoulder blade and say, okay, if the shoulder blade with the coracoid, with the coracoid process is able to perform as a sesamoid and fits the definition of the, fits the model of the bicycle wheel, that means that every other joint should be interpretable in the same way. So now, maybe the knee doesn't readily show for this, but why not, right? So you see, that means that we have start applying these more integrative concepts to the other things. So how would you interpret the performance of the knee if you were looking at it as their sesamoid thing? How would you reinterpret the performance of, I don't know, of the hand, if you were looking at it from the sesamoid perspective? Is it the approach? Yes, it is. Right? So you see, then we get the next point and say, hey guys, what is the main message? So basically, today we still talk about movement. So Jaap has mentioned it really well. It's shape, it's forming, right? And why we are, in fact, what is the main point that Fuller gave? What makes him so different? Geometry and physics are about motion, about big distances, about speeds, velocities, and so on. So they explore, physics and mathematics explore connectiveness. But to explore connectiveness, you have to move up very, very high, because you have to go into tensors, twisters, it's mind-blowing mathematics before it becomes connected. So there is connectiveness, but you cannot, the normal person cannot use it, right? I use this example, which kind of came to my mind not so long ago, right? So if you imagine ourselves being on the beach, right? And there are, big, coconut palm trees, right? Perfectly smooth. So that's what mathematics gives us, separate palm trees, geometry gives separate palm trees completely disconnected. And somewhere up there, up at their crowns, there is a net, there is a connection, those trees are connected, so and so on. That's high level mathematics. But basically, to climb to this connectedness, you have to climb this smooth, coconut palm tree with your bare hands. Or you have to kind of get your teeth and claws on it and climb up So that's how you grind the mathematical language. So that's the axis, and that was the main kind of battle of Fuller, that connectiveness should be available right from the beginning. You're not supposed to climb up before you being admitted there. So in that sense, that's his main point. So it's about the shape, it's about the forming, it's about how the thing could be anchored and self-stabilized without the use of the external, screws, nails, and all the other. So what are the secrets of self-stabilization? So that's the main thing about Fuller. But what we have, the implied idea behind anatomy, is movement. So in that sense, that's where we talk about the superstability and the remaining like ease of constraints. So that's why everything could be actually flipped on its head. So why we are starting our interpretations with the vertical vector? Who said so? My main point has always been, guys, if verticality was so important, show me the sensors of verticality. The body doesn't have sensors of verticality. None. So, but you've got sensors which are dealing with the angular momentum. So why, in that sense, we have to reconnect everything into the angular momentums, and then, you start implying the integrated things. So basically, you can flip things, and if we get back to our favorite point about the bicycle wheel, are the legs supporting or are the legs hanging from the top? So in that sense, you can apply consistent map and say, okay, what if we codify the entire torso as the one which is supporting the legs, and the legs are actually having a tendency to buckle? If we recodify this way, if we remap this way, what would that mean to our action? So the same thing, if we talk about everybody wants to release something, but if the release is part of the system which has to be self-stabilized in the first place. So the question is, how can I contribute to the areas which are dealing with the self-stabilization? So which means you start looking at the areas which are, you look at the body from the opposite perspective and say, okay, so these are my familiar areas which are called restrictions or whatever, impingements, whatever. But then you ask a question, what are the reciprocals of those? What are the reciprocals of those super dense areas and excess densifications which we tend to somehow discharge? What would be the reciprocals if they belong to the same matrix? If we are practical about the wholeness, well, how we would find the reciprocals which are excessively weak? So, it's once you start thinking this way, there is a whole lot of recodification, even from the existent nomenclature of anatomy. So you just kind of connect it in a different way, and you start that. So that's why I see it as a general way you can create all sorts of the anatomogrities and kind of recodify it this way. Does it help? Oh, everybody is
yes,
muted.
it does. Yeah, thank you. That's great. Thank you very much. Brilliant.
I mean, I can go on forever, like in this kind of example. So it's just, you just reconnect the parts and then flip them and so on. So
great. Thanks.
So in that sense, it has to be practical, the pragmatic part.
For those who asked, I think I and others have put in different kind of martial arts stuff if you want to look at some of that into the chat, some of those links. And we've got a lot of other links. So where are we? Everybody,
okay, so,
I think, has the ability to unmute if they have anything to say. We are still live on YouTube. I'm just going to mention that. Yeah. Chris is back.
I'm back. I had to get something to eat. It's pushing 4 hours. I've been on this Zoom session.
Yeah,
I
I think
set the YouTube live
Is it
off.
4 hours? No, come on.
No, I was on an hour before we went live, Leonid, getting things all set. So I'm taking a break, having my soup. But do you want me to turn the live off?
Yeah, let's toast everybody goodbye again.
Okay.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Come on next week.
Yeah,
We'll
okay,
go
but
off live
that's it.
now.
So we just wanted to say that we didn't, like, we opened the conversation, but we obviously haven't gotten to the most pressing matter, right? Most pressing matter. Where does biotensegrity begin and where does it end, right?
So we have more to go. We can we fit all we could into 3 hours, right?